Okay, we're up to the Mishnah on Chaf Aleph and Aleph Halacha. What's the name of the parak? Kol Harokin. This is the last parak, and we have to go quickly, I guess, because we have a blind and a half to cover in order to get to the end of the Masechta. So here we go. Kol Harokin, all of the spittle, the spit, people spit, and it's called spittle. So all the spittle, Hanimsaim Yerushalayim, that is found in the streets of Yerushalayim are Tahorin. We generally assume that the people who come to Yerushalayim are in a state of Tara, and we don't worry that the spittle comes from a Zav or a Zava. So all the spittle is generally assumed to be Tar. If you come into contact with it, no problem. Chutz mishel Shukha Elyon, Divrei Rabbi Meir, except for there was a marketplace called the Shukha Elyon, that was in sort of an elevated area of Yerushalayim. Divrei Rabbi Meir, as that's what Rabbi Meir says, everything else is Torah. And we'll see in the Gemara why the spittle that was found in the Shukha Elyon was in Becheskas Tuma. Rabbi Yossi says, well, it really depends on whether it was during the time of a regal, a festival or not. During the time of a festival, everybody had to make sure to be tahor during the time of the regalim. So then you can assume that the spittle was tahor, but not the rest of the year. So the rest of the year, and if the spittle was sort of in the main streets, in the middle, then you have to assume it was Tamei. Shebestadin Tahorin. The people who were Tahor was sort of the exception, so they were told to walk on the side, so any spittle on the side is assumed to be Tahor. Shasa Regel, but during the time of the Regel, so most people are Tahor. Shebe'emsa Tahorin, so whatever is sort of like in the middle of the thoroughfare, where most people would walk, that's assumed to be Tahor. Shebestadin, and the people who were Tamei were told to walk on the perimeter, to walk on the sides. So anything on the side was Tamei, was assumed to be from the people who were Tamei, who were told to walk on the side. Because it's always the minority that walk over to the perimeter to the side, while the majority of people, if they happen to be Tamei or Tar, walk in the middle. All of the utensils that are found in Yerushalayim, if it was in the path that led to the mikveh, and they sort of were lying around, so you have to assume that they dropped from people's hands as they were on the way to the mikveh when they were tamei and needed to be immersed. So therefore, you assume the kelim are tamein. But derech aliyah, but if it's on the path going up from the mikveh, so then the assumption is that they were already immersed, and therefore tahorin, that they're assumed to be pure, to be tahorin, purified from any contamination. Shalok yiridasan aliyasan divrei Rabbi Meir. That's Rabbi Meir, who says that the way down is not treated the same as the way up, because the way up is mal and bikdusha. They already had become tar. Rabbi Yossi, however, says, no, it doesn't really matter. If it's Yerushalayim, it doesn't matter whether it's on the way down to the mikveh, the way up from the mikveh. You assume that people are careful about their kelim in Yerushalayim. Amekula and tahorin, they're all tahor. Except for three types of utensils that were set aside for use in connection with graves. So you assume that these utensils were always coming in contact with people with corpses, and therefore they're assumed to be tamei, namely basket where bones would be placed, magrefa, shovels that would be used to shovel away bones, maritza, and a hammer that was used to crush stones that were used in connection with the graves. Some say it was used to crush bones to make it easier to transport bones. The Pharisee Saul doesn't like that because he says that's not really the way we treat our corpses. We don't just like chop up corpses. But either way, these things were used in connection with graves, so they're assumed to be tamei. Sakin and Shenim says, if you find a knife on the 14th day of Nisan, so you assume that it was properly immersed, so it could be prepared for shechting the Korban Pesach. Everybody had to shecht the Korban Pesach, so shochet ba miyad, so you would be allowed to use it to shecht with immediately. B'shlosh asar, if you only found it on the 13th day of Nisan, so it's possible that it wasn't toivel yet. So shana mapil. So then you have to make sure to first to toivel it. You got to pick it up and toivel it in a mikvah before you can use it. Kofetz, if it's a meat cleaver, that can be used for shechting, but generally it's used just to cut bones. So with the Korban Pesach, there's the halacha of esim lo sishbuva. You're not allowed to cut the bones of a Korban Pesach. So generally, there wouldn't be such an urgency to have the meat cleaver until the 15th day of Nisan. So whether you find it on the 14th day, on the 13th day, whether you find it on the 14th day, the assumption is that it hasn't been toiveled yet because you're not really going to need to use it until the last minute, until the 15th day. So therefore, the person would generally toivel it at the very last minute before sunset on the 14th day, and therefore you have to assume that it has to be re-immersed. From whenever Shona means it was re-immersed, meaning from whenever was the last time it was immersed, you have to assume that it needs to be immersed again because it wasn't necessarily prepared for its final use, even if you find it on the 14th day. If the 14th day of Nisan falls out on Shabbos, like it did this year, so you're not allowed to immerse on Shabbos or Yom Tov. So the assumption is that the person already immersed it beforehand, even though they don't need to use it until the 15th day. So shochet b'miyad, you can use it immediately. The reason why we use the word shochet, even though it really is generally used to cut bones, is because a meat cleaver could also technically be used for shechita. Okay, next page. If you found either the knife or the meat cleaver on the 15th day, where it's already Yom Tov, so you assume all the immersing had already taken place, because clearly this is even if Erev Pesach didn't fall out on Shabbos, because clearly you're not allowed to immerse on Yom Tov. So shochet b'miyad, you're allowed to use it immediately. If you found the meat cleaver attached to a knife, so then you assume that if the person had already immersed the knife, which they would have done on the 13th day, so you assume that the meat cleaver is treated the same. So even if you found it on the 14th day, the assumption is that it was already toivel terei kisakin. The Gemara says, Rabbi Yavim, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, the reason why the Shukah Elyon, this upper elevated marketplace area, was assumed to be a place where any spitter would be tameh, is because that's a place where the Nachrim, the non-Jews, all gathered over there because they had some laundromat. They had some place where they did their laundry, and the spit and Nachrim are treated like Zavin. They're treated like those whose spittle is automatically tameh, and therefore that is why all the spittle would be tameh, at least the midrabanan. So Amar B'Chanina Arudosi Nachrim B'Yerushalayim, that the non-Jews they used to break the necks of these various donkeys. There were arudos for the sake of presenting them to the royal palace, and they would do that in Yerushalayim, and there would be lots and lots of blood. There was so much blood from all of these donkeys that they slaughtered that the people who were the Ole Yerushalayim, the Jews who were there in Yerushalayim for the festival, so they would end up having blood go all the way up to their knees. They came in front of the Chachamim to find out, are we tameh from all of this dam, from all of this blood of these nevelos, these animals these non-kosher animals that had been killed for the sake of the royal palace, and now the blood is all over the place. So does the blood cause us to become tameh? And the Chachamim didn't seem to be terribly concerned about it. So we'll see it's a machlokes whether the dam and nevela causes tuma. A nevela itself conveys tuma with a kizayas of basar, and the dam, if you congealed it, if you had like a revius of dam, like 3 ounces worth, and you congealed it, so then you would have 1 ounce that would be congealed, which would be like the basar. So do we say that if it has a revius of dam, it conveys tuma? Do we say no, dam's not like basar and it doesn't convey tuma? So we see it's a question. It's a machlokes. So Rabbi Simon Mishem Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. So Rabbi Simon said in the name of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi that there was an incident that occurred. Ma'asav appeared to Michel Abbas Rebbe Shemesa. There was a case where there was a mule that belonged to Rebbe's household that died. And what happened? And they said that whoever paskin for the house of Rebbe said paskin that the blood is not going to convey tuma based on nevela, because it's not basar, it's not the meat, it's just the blood. So Rabbi Eliezer Shalom Rabbi Simon. So Rabbi Eliezer asked Rabbi Simon, who was reporting this story in the name of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, at Kama, up until how much blood do they say is not tummy? Maybe only up until revius, where it wouldn't congeal to the point in which it would be a thickness that it would become the equivalent of like the basar of a kizayas, because you need more than a revius. But maybe if it was more than a revius, where it could congeal and stand on a kizayas of mass, maybe then it would convey tuma. V'lo agivei. However, Rabbi Shimon did not respond. So Shal Rabbi Shimon Levi, so he went to the primary source. He went to Rabbi Shimon Levi himself, who's the one who reported the story. So Amalei out of Revius Tar. So he said, no, up until Revius, it would be Tar because then it would not congeal to a mass of a Kazayas. Yotem Mikan Tomei. But if it's more than a Revius of blood, so then it would convey to Mavash Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Simon Shmuasa. Rabbi Elazar was very unhappy that Rabbi Simon, who is the one who reported in the name of Rabbi Shua ben Levi, didn't answer his question and tell him what Rabbi Shua ben Levi's reasoning was or his distinction was, and he had to go straight to all the way to the source of Rabbi Shua ben Levi. Rabbi Beibai Rabbi Yosef Masni Hadinuvda. Rabbi Beibai recited this story about how Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi recited in the house of Rebbe. They said that the dam is not mitame. So Amalei Rabbi Yitzchak Babista. So Yitzchak Babista also wanted to understand that the fine points of this ruling is that any amount of blood or only up until a revius is not mitame. So ad kama Amalei, how much did he say? Ad revius tahar? Did he only say that up until the revius the blood would be tahar? But if it was more than, let's say, 3 ounces of revius, yotem mikana would be tameh. Uvatbe and Rabbi Beibai just a kind of just brushed him aside. So Amalei Rabbi Zreika begin to have us shalach ad Beibai. So Rabbi Zreika said to Rabbi Beibai that Rabbi Yitzchak Babis, asked you a legitimate question. Because he asked you a legitimate question, you're going to brush him aside. So Amalei, the reason I brushed him aside begin will have his daiti be is because I didn't have yeshiva das. I didn't have a clear command over this ruling. The Amar Rabbi Chanin, because and he gave an explanation of how he was to tumult. He said Rabbi Chanin says that there's a pasuk in Kisavo about in the Tochacha says that your life is going to hang in the balance. It's going to hang by a thread. So what is that referring to? It's somebody who every single year they have to have the money to buy all the wheat that they require for that year, and they don't know whether next year they're going to have enough money to buy. So like a little bit nervous. But you don't have to be nervous until like the year passes. Like you can go a full year without being nervous, but then at the end of the year, if you don't have the money, so it's you're in trouble. Then it says, but you're going to fear. It's referring to somebody else who's going to fear every single night and day. This is somebody who has to go to the merchant in order to buy what he needs. And he's going to be nervous on a more regular basis. Why is he going to be nervous on a more regular basis? Because the fact that he doesn't know, like if the merchandise is going to be available. And somebody who just does not trust in his life altogether is somebody who has to go to the bakery every single day. And who knows if the bakery is going to, have the bread ready. And I had to rely upon the bakery having fresh bread every single day, meaning that every single day, I don't know how sharp my mind is going to be. It could be sharp one day and then not sharp the next day. So my kadun. So what anyway is the final ruling regarding this matter up until how much blood of a nevela do we say is going to be tahor, and or do we say that if it's more than a revius, it's tamei? So hey, Rabbi Yoshua ben Pesora dam nevela shutar. So Yoshua ben Pesora happened to be of the opinion that a dam nevelos, if you have blood of a nevela, it's not the basar, not the flesh itself, it's the dam. It's completely tar. It sounds like he's saying even if it's more than a revius, it's going to be tahor. So mao tar. So we say that's not necessarily true. It could be that when he gave this edus, he meant that it's only Tommy Lahakshir, that it does not cause, if it would fall upon a food that had not yet become wet through any kind of water or dew or anything like that. So dam is one of the machshir, and it's one of the liquids that causes food to become eligible to contract tuma. So he's saying that it would not, the blood of an avela would not have that property that it would be machshir food to become eligible for tuma. That's what it means. But in terms of actually causing something to become tameh, something that was eligible to receive tumah, and then the dam touched it, so then it would cause that thing to become tameh. So taman taninan. So we have so we teach elsewhere. This entire sugya was in Tessa Amud Aleph. Dama sheretz mitame kivisaro. That if you have the blood of a sheretz, of a dead rodent, so it causes tumah, just like the flesh of the rodent conveys tumah with a kedasha, with just the lentils works. The same thing would be true regarding the blood. Mitame ve'eno machshir. But that's only that it conveys tumah, but it does not cause a food to become eligible to receive tumah by touching that food. But we don't have anything else which is similar. It sounds like we're saying we don't have anything else which is similar where we draw a contrast contrast between its ability to be makshir and its ability to be mitame. But we say that it would not be makshir on the one hand, but it would be mitame on the other hand. So therefore, it sounds like once we say that something is tahor, it means that it's tahor completely. It doesn't cause the food to become eligible to receive tum. It's not makshir, and it wouldn't be mitam either. So we say that's not necessarily true, and we can't therefore infer that when Rabbi Yeshua ben Pesach said that it's tahor, that the dam nevelos is tahor, that it's tahor completely. What he may have meant is that there's nothing like the dam of a sheretz in terms of that we say that the dam is a continuation of the basar. That just like the basar is mitame through a certain small shear, namely a ka'adasha, a lentil's worth. So the dam is therefore subsumed under that. It's considered to be just a continuation of the flesh, that it would be included in conveying tumah in only a shear of a ka'adasha, lentil's worth. But it could very well be that with respect to all other properties, the fact that we could, for example, distinguish between whether it's maksha and whether it's mitame, so that distinction might occur elsewhere with respect to dam nevelos. And it could be with dam nevelos when Rabbi Shimon ben Pesach said it's tar, and he meant it's tar mila'akshir, but it would be mitame, just that it would be mitame through a different amount. It would take a revius to be mitame as opposed to a kizayas, which is the amount of the basa would be mitame of a nevelos. So what's the bottom line? So I'm Rabbi Yossi, pligi batrein amoraim. Two amoraim disagree about this point. One says the dam nevela is tameh if you have more than a revius, and one says, nah, it's tar completely. So man dam tameh, Rabbi Yehuda. The one who says it's tameh is like the edus of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, and like if you look at Maseches Eidios, so the Baal HaMeimah, the one in Maseches Eidios who says this principle, the dam nevelos can be metame if it's more than a revius, is Rabbi Yehuda. So that would be going like Rabbi Yehuda. Man dam tar, and the one who says that it's completely tar will go like the simple meaning of what Rabbi Yeshua ben Pesach. What Rabbi Yeshua ben Pesach said when he said that dam nevelos is tar, and it sounded a little bit like it's not only tar that it's not makshir, but it's tar that it's not metame either, even if it's more than a revius. So Amalei Rav Duma medimim nachusa. So Duma from Ben Nechusa said, V'yeus, who would always like go down from Eretz Yisrael to Bava, V'yeus the Rabbi Yehuda Maraina the Ben Nesiyah. It makes sense that Rabbi Yehuda would have paskin this way, that that he's the one that when we have this edus from Yeshua ben Levi, that somebody paskin in the Ben Nesiyah of Rebbe that the dam nevelos is not mitame if it's a revius or less, but if it's more than a revius, it would be mitame. It makes sense that would have been Rabbi Yehuda who paskin that way, because he was the official posek for the Ben Nesiyah, for the Nasi's house. The Nasi was, of course, the line of the leaders from the house of Rebbe. So it makes sense that he's the one who would have issued this ruling. Okay, continuation. That entire last 8 lines is chazara, because we had that in Testament Aleph for those who are keeping score. So we said about the spittle that all the spittle is tar unless it is in the shuka elyon. So what do you mean that if it was in the Shukha Elyon, it's going to be tar? We have a tradition that all the spittle in Yerushalayim is assumed to be tar. So Amir Levi said, no, there's an exception. Rabbi Yavin Mishem Rabbi Shua ben Levi explained, as we said earlier at the very beginning of this Gemara, there was like a laundry area where they would do laundry, and they would wash clothing, and all the goyim would do that. It was a place of non-Jews, and non-Jews, we have a gezerah that their spittle is considered to be tummy just like Zovin, and that's the reason why that little area was an exception to the rule. What happens the rest of the year? So the rest of the year, we're assuming that according to the Mishnah, or at least according to Rabbi Yossi, who disagreed with Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yossi drew a distinction between the time of the regular and time of the rest of the year. So he said, the rest of the year, we assume that whatever is in the main thoroughfare is tummy. It's shibolis. The Tmeim will walk like in a shibolis, in a straight line of grain. That's called the shibolis. So they go right in the middle. So therefore, all the spittle in the middle is tummy. And the ones who are tahor walk on the sides. If you had somebody who was tahor, who was walking in the middle, they would tell him, don't walk in the middle. You don't belong here. The Tmeim would tell him, go on the side, separate from us. But when the time of the regel, when the tahorim were the majority, the tahorim would walk in the middle. And the Tmeim would walk on the side. If the Tmeim Kohanim would forget where they're supposed to walk, and they would walk in the middle, the Taharim would scream at them, hey, get away from us. You guys should be on the side, so that we can maintain our chazaka, that any spittle, hopefully there won't be like too much spittle, but that any spittle will be considered to be tar if it's in the middle. In the middle of the road. We said all the kalim are, according to Rabbi Meir, we distinguish between whether they're found on the way down to the mikveh, the way up from the mikveh, and according to Rabbi Yossi, all the kalim are tarics with 3 exceptions. So so how could Rabbi Meir say that if the kalim were found on the way down to the mikveh, they were considered to be tamei? But we had a principle that it's assumed that all kalim are tar. So we say no. According to Rabbi Meir, since you found them, it's a reisa. If you found them on the way down to the base of tefillah, the assumption is they had become tamei, and that's the reason they were being brought down to the base of tefillah. If they were on the ground, they didn't make it to the mikveh, so then the assumption is these are exceptions to the rule, and they would be tamei. That would be the proof would be in the pudding. So Abba Shol, how you call sipurin? So Abba Shol, we call something sipurin. What do we call sipurin? We said there were 3 different utensils according to Rabbi Yossi that were assumed to be tamei. One was the basket, one was the shovel, and one was the maritza. So what's a maritza? It's like a hammer. Why was it called the maritza? Why was it? So what was it refer? So it was also called a tzipor, a fingernail. Why was the hammer called the fingernails? So one said, so Abba Shol said it was called a tzipurin. Why? Because it kind of like hung out. That on the top, it kind of pointed out the way that a fingernail points out. It has like the pointy part at the very top. So therefore, because it was like pointy at the top, that's why it's called a tzipor. Mandam maritza, and the one who called it a maritza, which is what we call it in our Mishnah, shemaritza se'evan lebeis hakvaros. So because of the fact that it chops up, a maritza is a lashon of chopping up. It chops up the stones that are going to be used in the graveyard. And some say, as I mentioned earlier, that it was used to actually chop up bones, according to one opinion. Kopitz v'chulei. We said the meat cleaver, if it is attached to the knife, so then we treat it like the knife. Tani asakin shur the law harezu kemosa. So the simple reading of this line is that we're just explaining the Mishnah, that if the meat cleaver was attached to the sakin, so then we would assume that just like the sakin had already been toivel because you needed to shech the korban Pesach, so the kopitz would also be assumed if you found it on the 14th day to have been toivel as well. There are other interpretations, but that assume that this line is a different mandam that's arguing what it says in the Mishnah. It's like the other way around, that I have to treat the sakin the way that I would treat the kopitz, but I think that's sort of a pashup shad explanation. Okay, next Mishnah, paroka shnitma. If I had a parochis, I had the curtain that was hanging in the base of Mikdash, right? So if it was that was between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim, so if it became Tamei only with a Vlada Tuma, only with a Rishon Latuma, no big deal. So then you could taivel it even inside of the Azara. There was a place, a big Yam Shel Shlomo, a big mikveh where you can taivel even a giant parochis, so you could taivel it there. And you just bring it back to a place where it belongs between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim immediately. Since it only became Tamei to a Rishon L'Tuma, it doesn't even have to wait till nightfall. But if it became Tamei to an Avatuma, so the Parochis itself became a Rishon L'Tuma, so then it already is so Tamei, you got to move it away from the Yazara to taivel it in the mikveh outside of the Yazara, and then you lay it out to dry in the area outside of the Ezras Nashim, which is called the Ches, like a 10 amma area right outside the Ezras Nashim, Shemesh, because it requires nightfall until it would be considered Torah again. If it happened to be new and beautiful, you wanted everybody to see it, so you would bring it into like the entrance way of the Har HaBayis, where they had these benches, and you put it on top of the benches, on the awning on top of the benches, so everybody could see how beautiful it was. Rabbi Shimon ben Sagan, Parokas Uvia, what were the dimensions of the Parokas? So they had the thickness of a tefach, which is about like 4 inches. So tefach al Shimon Mushtayim Nimim Ne'eregis, and it was woven with 72 nimim. The nimim are like the looped wires in the harness of a loom. That's what we refer to. We discussed this in the context of Peraka Oreg and Masechah Shabbos of Oseh Shtei Batei Nirin. So these are the as I said, the loop wires in the harness of a loom. Also referred to as the leashes. as the leashes. That's the word that's used for it. On every single one of these leashes, there were 24 threads that were woven. The dimensions of the parochis was that it was 40 amos long, 40 amos high, 20 amos, and 20 amos wide. Those were the dimensions of the Heichal and the base of Mikdash. It was made from 820,000 watt, 820,000 dinarim, that its value, either it's a value that was so valuable it was worth 820,000 dinarim, or maybe the meaning might be that the number of threads was 820,000, or that there were 820,000 rivos, young women that were used to embroider it, to weave it together, because it required such a massive amount of work in order to put together. Shtayim osin b'chol shana, they would make 2 of them every single year. Shosh me'as kohanim atbilin also was so giant, 300 kohanim would have to lift it in order to take it to the mikveh to immerse it properly.
Rabbi, quick question. Weren't they doing, in the time of Shlomo, changing every year, the parochet, new parochet every year?
They would make a new parochos every single year. Not only that, but I think it says they would make 2 new parochos every single year. Shtayim osim b'chol shana. They would make 2 new ones every single year.
2 new ones b'chol shana. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Elo ama chut echad kafel. If it just would have been said you make it out of 1 thread, so you fold up the thread and that's 2 threads. Couple of shnaim. Shezor, if it would have said shezor, that it has to be a little bit more threaded, l'shlosha, that means 3 threads. Mashazar, but what the pasuk actually says with respect to how you make the parochos is that it has to be shesh mashazar. So mashazar has the connotation of being twined. So twined indicates that it has to be twined 6 times, and there were 4 different types of materials that were used, right? There was the techeles, and the argaman, Misilah Shani, Bishesh. So that's 4 different materials. Abba, 6 times 4 equals 24. Mikana Abba Be'esrim Abba. So therefore, it was woven over 24 times. So Tani Shoshim Shtayim, that's Elo's opinion. But there's another opinion that says 32. Or there's another version of this that says 32. Ilu Amar, not Elu Amar. So Elu Amar had it said, Chut echad kafel, then it means a couple of shnayim. If it just would have said 1 thread, so that means doubled over. Shazor, if it's twisted la'aba, then it should be twisted 4 times. Mashizar, but if it's twined, lishmonis. And then I double that and it's 8 times, since there were 4 materials. Arba, mikan hatlasinu train. So that 8 times 4 is 32. Tana Abba Mishmona. And there's another Tana that says, no, it's 48, each that it was made of 48 threads. Ilu amachut echad, a couple of shnayim. Had it just said 1 chut, it would have been doubled over. Tkliya, if it would have said braided, l'shosha, that would be 3. Shazor, if it would have said twisted, l'shisha, that would be double, that's 6. Mashzar, when it says mashzar, that it's twined, sheish masar, l'shnei masar, it means 12. So since there are 4 materials, Abba, mikan, Abba, that's 4. So 12 times 4 is 48. Mikan, Abba, utmania. So that it was twisted over to 48 threads. Custom echad omer, maaseh rokem, with respect to the masach, with respect to the curtain that when you enter into the Mishkan, it says maaseh rokem. Custom echad omer maaseh kosher. But it said with respect to the parochos, between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim, it says maaseh kosher. Maaseh rokem is like embroidered. Maaseh kosher means like a craftsman. What's the difference between maaseh rokem of like the masacha, the curtain when you enter into the Kodesh, and the maaseh kosher of the parochos, the curtain when you go, that separates between the Kodesh and HaKadoshim, the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Maaseh rokem, so maaseh rokem, it's embroidered, so then it's the same appearance on one side as the other side. It's just, all woven within, within the material, and if whatever appearance, whatever figure or image you have embroidered on one side is going to appear on the other side. Maaseh kosher, but it's craftsman's work, so then you would fashion the different images on the 2 different sides. Shnei partzufos. Rabbi Yehuda v'Minachemia, there are different understandings of how this works between Rabbi Yehuda v'Minachemia. Chanama, one says, Maaseh rokem, if it was embroidered, Maaseh Ari Mikan, Ari Mikan. So if you have a line on one side, so then there's a line on the other side. Maaseh Choshe, but if it's craftsman's, Ari Mikan Mechalak Mikan. You have a line on one side and it is blank on the other side. V'charana on the other one says, no, Maaseh Vokem Ari Mikan Mechalak Mikan. Maaseh Vokem means that you just have one line and on the other side it's like thick enough, there's nothing on the other side. Maaseh Choshe, craftsman's work, you actually have two different figures that are woven on each of the two different sides. Ari Mikan, Menesher Mikan. You have a line on one side and you have a nesher, you have, for example, an eagle on the other side. I think if you look at Rashi, Rashi puts the two together. He says that my Serokem is I have one figure and then it penetrates through both sides when it's embroidered, and my Sekhoshe means that I have one figure woven on one side and one figure woven on the other side. We said that 82 times 10,000, whatever, is the total amount of either the value of it or the number of women who worked on it or the number of threads that it has. So Rabbi Yitzchak Guzma. Rabbi Yitzchak says this is a guzma. It could be that the guzma is an exaggeration. It could be the exaggeration word, according to some Mephoshim, is not going on the Shmonim Mishtayim Ribo, but on the latter part of the Mishnah, where it says 300 Kohanim were needed to carry it in order to immerse it to the mikveh. That might be the guzma. Tamat Tanina, it says we in Maseches Tamid, that there were 300 kor, which is like an enormous amount of ashes that were placed on them, that would gather on the mizbeach until they would clear the mizbeach from the various korbanos. That was called the tapuach. Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Bun M'shem Mishmor Guzma. And here too, we say that was an exaggerated amount. It wasn't, they didn't make it like so much. That would have been like, an absolutely astronomical amount of ashes that would have been on top. That would have been like over 7 feet high. Because a core is 30 sa'ah, and a sa'ah is about 3 gallons. And if you do the math, it's like, an astronomical amount of ashes. So that also was meant as an exaggeration, and it means there was a lot. Okay, next halacha. Mishmisha says, Basa kachi kashim shnimah, if I have the meat of kachi kashim that became tameh, bein ma'avatuma bein mevladatuma, whether it became tameh through coming into contact with an avatuma, like the spittle of a zava or a sheretz itself, or something that became tamei through an avatuma, in which case the basa would then become a shening the tuma, whether it became tamei on the inside of the Azara or whether it was outside of the Azara. Rabbi Shammai says that it's all supposed to be kept kind of like, inside the Azara. It should be burned inside of the Azara, except unless we have a sort of a combination that it became tummy in a very serious fashion and it wasn't inside to begin with. So if it became tummy in a very serious fashion through coming into contact with an avatuma and it was already outside, that's the only time that we're going to actually burn it on the outside and not bring it inside altogether. Basil takes the opposite approach and says that generally speaking, it's not bekavadik. You're going to have tamei basar inside of the base, inside of the Azara. So everything should be burned on the outside if it became tamei, unless it became tamei when it was already inside and it was a low-level tumah. Because it only became tamei to a vlada tumah and it was already inside. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, on the last daf of Masech Shkolim, Rabbi Eliezer says that he has a different cheshbon. He says if it became, we look at the seriousness of how tamei it became. If it became very tamei, that it came into contact with an avatuma, then we don't care whether it was already inside or whether it was outside. It should be burned on the outside. But if it wasn't such a serious tuma, so then I look at the fact that it wasn't like such a serious level of tuma, and then I could burn it on the inside of the azara. So then, whether it became tummy inside or outside, I would burn it on the inside if it only became tummy to a vlada tuma. I look at the seriousness of the tuma. Rabbi Kiva says location. I look at the location. Where did it become tamei? Welcome to Masal Sham Srei Faso. If it became tamei in Bifnim, inside the Azara, I burn it inside. Became tamei outside the Azara, I burn it outside. That's kind of hard enough to remember. 4 different opinions, but the Gemara is going to make it more complicated. So the Gemara says, Bar Kapara Amar. Bar Kapara says, when we speak about Avatuma and Vladatuma, what we mean is Avatuma is that the basa became tamei on a deraisa level, and vladatuma means it became tamei on a derabanan level, that it touched a kli that had come into contact with mashkin that themselves were not an avatuma. Since the mashkin were not themselves an avatuma, they only had come into contact with an avatuma, so that mashkin can't really convey tuma to a kli. And when the basar then comes into contact with a kli, so it's not really tamei in the deraisa level; it's only tamei in the rabbanan level. So bar kapara ma'ava tumah dvar Torah, that when the basar comes into contact with an avatumah, it means that was on a Torah level, like a mashkin from a zav, for example, that touched a kli, and then the basar touched the kli. Vada tumah midivrayim, and vada tumah just means that's only a drabanan. Rabbi Yochanan ben zed dvar Torah. Rabbi Yochanan says no. Even the vlada tumah is talking about when it is on a deraisa level. It just means that it's a sheni l'tumah as opposed to like a rishon l'tumah. Like for example, if it would be an avatuma, so that means that the basar came into direct contact with a sheretz. And if we're talking about a vladatuma, it means that the basar came into contact with a kli that had become tamei through the spittle of a zav, which does convey tumah on a deraisa level, and then the basar touched that kli, so the basar became a shenim tumah as opposed to becoming a rishon tumah. So v'kasha de Rabbi Yochanan. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, that whether the basar came into contact with the avatuma, whether it came into contact with the vladatuma, we're talking about tumah on a deraisa level. Well, what difference does it make then if it is a rishon l'tumah, whether it's a sheni l'tumah? Lamaisa, it's tamei deraisa. The kasha of Rabbi Yochanan, the Beis Shammai. So then we don't understand Beis Shammai's distinction. The Beis Shammai bachutz. Beis Shammai says everything is not so serious. Everything can be burned on the inside of the azara, unless it became tamei through a very serious tumah, through the avatuma bachutz. So wait a second. If even the vladatuma is deraisa, ma bein avatuma bachutz, ma bein vladatuma bachutz. Either one is deraisa. Saying you shouldn't bring it inside of the azara to burn. Both of them are going to be dvar Torah. I feel the Beis Hillel, makasha, and even according to Beis Hillel, you wouldn't have a kasha. According to Rabbi Yochanan, approaching according to Beis Hillel, you would have a kasha. Because what did Beis Hillel say? Beis Hillel said that everything has to be treated very seriously. Everything should be burned only on the outside, unless it was like a light tumah, and it was already inside. But wait a second. But ma bein balada tumah bifnim, ma bein avatuma bifnim. Once I'm already being makel to burn it on the inside, if it became tamei through a vladatuma, if the vladatuma is deraisa, so I should have a similar treatment with respect to the avatuma. That's also deraisa. They're both deraisa. They're both serious levels of tuma. So the Gemara says, no, we didn't have a kasha in Rabbi Yochanan's approach to distinguish between deraisa and derabanan. To distinguish between an a rishon l'tuma and a sheni l'tuma. I get it. I get the fact that I'm distinguishing between a rishon l'tuma and a sheni l'tuma. That's not such a big kasha. That's like one way of understanding it. The real kasha that we would have is on the opinion of Bar Kapara, who says that one tuma was deraisa, and the other opinion and the other tuma is the rabbanan. That's a much so al Bar Kapara. On Bar Kapara we have a kasha. We have a kasha to Bar Kapara al de Beis Shammai, that according to Beis Shammai's opinion, I don't understand it anymore. According to Bar Kapara, when it became tamei to an avatum, it's deraisa, it came tumah to a vladatum, it's rabbanan. Wait a second, what did Beis Shammai say? Beis Shammai Beis Shammai said, I don't treat anything, all that seriously. Everything can be burned inside, except for one exception, unless it became tamei through an avatuma, unless the basar became tamei through an avatuma b'chutz, so it's a serious level of tumah. It's already outside that I don't bring it inside. But once it's an avatuma, and the whole distinction according to Bar Kapara is between deraisa and drabanan, so once it's in a deraisa tumah, I have to treat that seriously wherever it became tamei. Avatuma bein b'chutz bein b'fnim. Even if it became tamei through an avatuma b'fnim, I should move it to the chutz, because that's a much higher level of tumah. They're both considered that these are talking about the tumah on a deraisa level as opposed to a drabanan level. So begin to Rabbi Akiva Amar. So we say no, because this particular approach is going like Rabbi Akiva. Begin to Rabbi Akiva Amar makom tamaso sham teisrei paso. Even though you're right, it's a very serious tumah when the basar becomes tamei to an avatuma b'fnim. I'm still not going to move it outside, because this is following the approach of makom tamaso sham teisrei paso. Vafilo de Beis Hillel makasha. But according to Beis Hillel, I also should ask a kasha according to the approach of Bar Kapara. Because what did Beis Hillel say? Beis Hillel said I have to treat everything very seriously. Everything has to be burned outside. Unless, number one, it was already inside, the basa was already inside. Number two, it only became tamei through a blada tumah. Well, we're saying now, according to Bar Kapara, a blada tumah is nothing. A blada tumah is just a tumah d'rabbanan. So it's only a tumah d'rabbanan. Even if it became tamei through a blada tumah b'chutz, I should bring it inside to burn. Even if it was on the outside, let me bring it inside because it's not such a serious tumah. It's only d'rabbanan. Let me it's only a tumah d'rabbanan. So we get to Rabbi Shimon Amar. So we say no. This is that we have a principle that once it's tamei outside, I don't bring it inside. Because just like we say, Rabbi Shimon says elsewhere, if I have the food or the drink of a mitzorah, even though it's not the mitzorah itself, just like I send the mitzorah outside of even the machane Yisrael, outside the machane Shechina, outside the machane Levi, outside the machane Yisrael, go, get out. I say get out, even to the food and the drink of a mitzorah. I send it out. I'm not bringing things back in that are tamei. So too, I'm not going to bring in, even though this basta only became tamei to a bladder tumah outside the Azar, I'm not going to bring it into the Azar. Okay, good. Halakha Dalet. So Mishnah says, Evari Atamin, Naya Mishnah, Evari Atamin, Nitani Michatzi Keresh Lamata. B'ma'arav. So if I slaughtered the korban tamid in the morning and I have all of the limbs are supposed to be offered on the mizbeach before the limbs of any other korban, because the korban tamid shel shachar comes first. But it's a busy day. It's Rosh Chodesh, just like today. I also have a korban musaf. I have limbs all over the place. I didn't have a chance yet to burn the limbs on the mizbeach, but I want to remember where the tamid shel shachar limbs are, so I have to put them in a very specific place on the ramp. Okay, so I put them on the west side of the ramp, on the bottom part of the ramp, on the west side. Shel musaf, and then the limbs of the korban musaf, I have to remember exactly where they are. I put them on the bottom side of the part of the ramp on the east side. There are different girsas. I'm going with the girsa in front of me. And if it is the special korban of Rosh Chodesh, meaning Shel Musafim, generally speaking, we're talking about the Musaf like of, let's say, Shabbos or something like that. But if I have two Musafim, let's say it's Shabbos and it's Rosh Chodesh, so then I have to put the Musafim of the limbs of the Musaf Shel Rosh Chodesh, internal Akakov Mizbeach. Milmalan. So then I put it on the actual top of the Mizbeach in the area between the horns of the Mizbeach where the Kohanim would walk around. Hashkam, that's how the Yerushalmi understands Kakov Mizbeach. Different interpretations of the Bavli seems to have a different interpretation of what the Kakov HaMizbeach means over here. Maybe it means the upper part of the kevish, or maybe it means the indented protrusion towards the top of the Mizbeach, but not the very, very top of the Mizbeach. Giving shkalim and bringing bikurim to the base of Mikdash is something which is only done when you have the base of Mikdash, because I only need the shkalim for kabbanos in the base of Mikdash, and the bikurim, it's the bikurim is something where the Torah says Reishis bikurei ad maskot tavi beis Hashem Elokecha, supposed to bring the bikurim to the house of the base of Mikdash, the base of Hashem Elokecha. You don't have a house, you don't have a base of Mikdash, you don't bring the bikurim. Fine. About meiser dogon, but as far as taking trumos to meisros, meiser behema, and separating out one out of every 10 animals, ubechoros, and the sanctification of the firstborn animals. So those are all sacred. Those are all considered to be sacred. Nogin maybe b'nei bayis bein shlo b'nei bayis, whether I have a base of mikdash or not. Presumably with the bechor and the meiser, I just wait until they receive a blemish, and then you could eat them without bringing them as a korban, because you can't bring a korban if you don't have a base of mikdash. Hamakish shkalm and become a raise a kodesh. In the event, though, even though there's no base of mikdash, if I would take a shekel nowadays, a half a shekel, and say I want this to be a half a shekel, so it's going to receive the sanctity of a half shekel. If I set aside for first fruits and I say I want these first fruits to be bikurim, even though there's no base of mikdash, they're going to have the sanctity of bikurim. Rabbi Shimon says no. Rabbi Shimon says I don't agree with respect to bikurim. Home bikurim kodesh and kodesh. If you say the bikurim are kodesh, it's not going to be kodesh because it says tavi beis Hashem Elokecha. There has to be a base of mikdash in order for bikurim to become kodesh. Otherwise, it doesn't become kodesh. But it sounds like Rabbi Shimon says if I set aside a machzis a shekel and I say I want this to have the sanctity of a machzis a shekel for whatever the base of mikdash is going to be built, it would have that sanctity. And then if you messed with it for personal use, you'd be over on Me'ilah. So that's one of the reasons when we give the machzis a shekel in Tainis Esther, whereas many poskim say you're supposed to say zeicher the machzis a shekel. I'm not giving a real machzis a shekel. This is zeicher. It's a commemoration of the machzis a shekel. You're actually supposed to articulate that as you put down the three half coins. The machzis a shekel, you say zeicher, based on this opinion of Rabbi Shimon. So the Gemara says ezu kakov mizbeach. What do we understand the Kakav Mizbeach to mean, different interpretations, but the Yerushalmi gives you, a definitive answer. Amma ben Karen the Karen. Malcolm Hilach Raglei Kohan. In the very top of the Mizbeach, there were horns on all four sides, and there was one Amma that was on the outer Amma of the Mizbeach on all four corners. That little area between each of the horns, that's the place where the Kohanim would walk around. That's the Kakov. That's where you put the limbs of a Rosh Chodesh offering until you're ready to burn them on the Mizbeach. Musfei Shabbos and Musfei Rosh Chodesh Mikodim. Which musaf do you bring? We know that the first thing that you bring in the morning is the Tamid Shel Shachar, but now I have a musaf. I have a korban musaf of Shabbos. I have a korban musaf of Rosh Chodesh. Which one comes first? So Rabbi Yirmiyah Sava Meima Musfei Shabbos, Musfei Rosh Chodesh Komin. Rabbi Yirmiyah thought that Rosh Chodesh comes first. Musaf Rosh Chodesh comes first. Where does that come from? Where did he have that idea that the musaf Rosh Chodesh comes first? It's not Tadir. It's not the more regular offering. The more regular offering is the musaf Shabbos, which is every week. So Chayle to his strength, meaning his source was from Rabbi Yirmiyah. Where did Rabbi Yirmiyah get it from? Mihamin Hadat, from the following. Shir Shabbos or Shir Rosh Chodesh. When it comes to Shir Shel Yom, which one do you say first? Yeah, do you say Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbos before Baruch Nafshi or Baruch Nafshi before Mizmor Shel Shabbos? Which one comes first? So Shel Rosh Chodesh. Interestingly enough, so here the Yerushalmi says Shir Shel Rosh Chodesh Kodim. The shir, the song of Rosh Chodesh comes first. So I'm Rabbi Yosef Shani. So therefore he thought the Sotu the Musaf would come first. So Rabbi Yosef says no, that's different. Shani Taman. That case is different. That's like giving a clap. Reminding everybody it's Rosh Chodesh. The way you remind everybody it's Rosh Chodesh is that you have the song of Rosh Chodesh come first. But as far as the Korban Musaf is concerned, we have different principles. So how would you go about doing this? So you would bring the Musaf of Shabbos first and the song of Rosh Chodesh first. So you would shech the Shokei Musaf Shabbos, you'd shech the Korban Musaf of Shabbos, the animals of the Korban Musaf, the Amalei and Shil Rosh Chodesh. And you would say the song of Rosh Chodesh while you shechted the Korban Musaf of Shabbos. But as far as the Korban Musaf itself, the Korban Musaf for Shabbos comes first. The Musaf Shabbos Kaimin, Al Shem Kol Tadir Mechaber, Kol Mechaber, based on the principle Tadir Sheino Tadir. Tadir Kodem. Musaf Shabbos come more regularly. They come every single week. So Musaf Shabbos comes before the Musaf of Rosh Chodesh. Shkamim Bikurim Mechulei. What do we say about Shkamim Bikurim? We're in the final stretch over here. Okay, Hashkalim Kachu. So it sounds like according to Rabbi Shimon, if you would give a shekel nowadays, give a makatzis a shekel, say I want this makatzis a shekel to have full-fledged kedusha, it would be chal. Unlike the Bikurim where he says it's not chal, it wouldn't have kedusha. So why would that be? So Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Shimon says not true. He says, I don't agree with that. Even the Makasis shekel, if you gave it the Shem Kedusha, that also would not receive sanctification nowadays. So we have the following principle. A ger, when he becomes converts to Judaism, a ger is supposed to receive a bris milah and converts in a mikvah and also bring a korban olah. He's supposed to bring two birds. But nowadays, you can't bring two birds as a korban because we don't have a base of mikdash. So Tani Kebez man says, rivers kesef. So there's one opinion that says he has to set aside a rivers kesef, a quarter of a dinar of money, which is the minimum amount that it takes to buy two birds to bring as his korban. So when the base of mikdash will be built, he'll have his money ready to buy his korban. So I'm Rabbi Shimon, Bitla Rabbi Yochanan and Zakkai Minei Takala. So Rabbi Shimon says, Rabbi Yochanan and Zakkai did away with this because of a takala. The money is sitting around for who knows how long. A person might use it for mundane purposes. He'll be more behektish. So what does it mean Minei Takala? Kahad the tiny, like we said the following, that nowadays you should not sanctify anything because it'll just sit around in your house and you might come to use it by mistake for mundane purposes. And you don't set aside a person's value, or and you don't make something chayrim, and you don't take trumas. Of course you take trumas. So some delete this line. And if you did any of these things, let's say you sanctified a garment, you have to burn it because otherwise it'll come to a takala. That's what I mean. We're worried it's going to lead to a takala, that you'll use it for mundane purposes. Like if it's a garment, you have to burn it. If you sanctified an animal, you have to wait for it to die, basically. Te'aka means you uproot it, you cause it to die, you leave it to starve in a room. You close the door in it, it dies gradually. And if you sanctify money, you got to throw it into some place where it's going to get destroyed, namely the Amamelch, very salty water, so it'll get destroyed. But you can't leave it around. What if you ended up being makdish nowadays? So then what happens? So if that which from that which Rabbi Shimon says, the Rabbi Yochanan and Zakkai did away with a ger nowadays setting aside money for his korban. So we see that if a ger, here we're talking about if a ger would set aside his, it would be makdish money for his korban, that it really would be chal. The kedusha would vest, and therefore that's why Rabbi Yochanan and Zakkai had to do away with it, because we had to worry that it would be used for mundane purposes. That it would in fact vest with the sanctity would vest, and that's what we're worried about. Some say that when the Beis Hamikdash is rebuilt, every single ger is going to have to bring a korban in order to be able to maintain his full sanctity or her full sanctity of being a convert. That's Rabbi Yitzchak Panovich holds that way. Avnei Nezer says no. From the fact we did away with it, we see that the kedusha Yisrael of a ger does not depend on the ger bringing the korban. Rabbi Yoda Antu Doraya, Baikum Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yoda from Antu Doraya asked in front of Rabbi Yossi, Hacha at Amar Kitcher. You hold like in this particular case, you hold it with a ger. If he sets aside the money does have sanctity. But you endorsed the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, Mishum Rabbi Shimon, that if you would sanctify makasis a shekel nowadays, it would not receive kedusha. So what's the difference between the two? Why does the money set aside from the ger get kedusha and not the money set aside for the makasis a shekel, according to you? So Amalei Taman Lakakei Makdisha Lachatchila. He says because there's no mitzvah really to set aside once we're like in the middle of the year. You're not supposed to like set aside the money for the shkalim, because when the Beis Hamikdash is going to be rebuilt, that's not the money that's going to be used for the kabbanas. You're going to have kabbanas from Truma Chadasha, from the new Truma, from the new collection that's going to be made at that point. Yeshana. And this money that you're setting aside now is going to be older coins, so therefore it doesn't serve any value. That's why he says it doesn't have kedusha. But when it comes to the money set aside by a ger for his korban, the gabe hekdeshos acherim. But when it comes to the money set aside by a ger, this is yeshana. This is considered. This doesn't have a din of it being old. The coins for makasis shekel is old with respect to next year's coins. The gabe hekdeshos acherim kinu shogeri and atzarich kadasha. But when it comes to anything else that you're going to be makdish, or when it comes to the money set aside by a ger, it doesn't have to be new. It's always considered to be fine. It could be that you set aside 5 years later, it's still going to be fresh and fine. So he says, but why don't we kadosh? And therefore, what is set aside by the ger is considered to be kadosh. Why don't we say the same thing with respect to the shkalim? Say that the shkalim should be kadosh because Beis Hamikdash will be built like tomorrow. So we say no, but maybe it won't be built tomorrow because v'nisan nigalo, though v'nisan asid nigayah. We assume that we're going to be redeemed like next Nisan. And when the Beis Hamikdash is going to be built, when is it going to be built? On the first day of Nisan. So therefore, I'm going to need a new collection, and whatever I set aside now is going to become old. It's going to be a new collection. Everything is going to be used from the new coins that are going to be collected next Nisan, on the first day of Nisan, when the Beis Hamikdash will be rebuilt. And whatever you set aside now is going to be old. So therefore, there's no point towards that being kaddish. And now, however, by contrast, when it comes to what's being set aside for the korban of the ger, it's not going to become obsolete. It's not going to become outdated because of next year. It'll always be current. Because that's not something that's brought from the Chumas Halishka. So if Amnuna Rabba says B'Shem Rav, what's the who's the halacha like? It says the halacha is Rabbi Shimon, not Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, but Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon of our Mishnah, who says that if you set aside Bikurim, so it doesn't become Kaddish, but if you set aside Shkalim, it does become Kaddish. And that's the reason, again, for our minhag, according to most poskim, that we're very careful when we set aside the Makasis Shekel to say Zik the Makasis Shekel, because we don't want it to actually become Kaddish. Hadran Allah Perakol Arokin, Uslik Allah Maseches, Uslik Allah Maseches Shekalim, Mazel Tov, Sim Tov, Mazel Tov, Yehelanu. Amen.